Good morning, Love in Action. And how are you this morning? I'm recording this the afternoon before, and it's a beautiful afternoon here, a little breezy, but looking wonderful. And I hope you're all having a very good week. Thank you for joining us today and coming to us as we work our way through the 5th chapter in 1 Peter. Thank you for being here. We've had a hard week in many respects for members of our class, and I just want to particularly remember Vicki and Jeff this week and for what they're going through, and just ask that we all remember all the prayer requests in prayer as Karen sends them out faithfully every week. So sometimes life gets hard, and sometimes we have to go through difficult times. And because of that, it's good to be reminded, as we have been in the book of Peter, 1 Peter, that while we're walking on this earth, there are sufferings that happen and difficulties that happen. And because we are with the Lord, He will see us through, and He will see us through the other side. So let's look at the 5th chapter of 1 Peter. To begin with, a little review on Peter. Again, at this point, Peter, it's estimated somewhere around the year 64, Peter is writing this. It's just before the persecutions from Nero. We know that it has to be before that because Peter was martyred during the persecutions of Nero. It's a hard time for the church because although the official persecutions from Rome itself has not begun, remember that Israel has been persecuting the church all along. They've been trying to shut down this cult of Jesus Christ, and they wouldn't have called him Christ, this cult of Jesus, they would have said. The carpenter's cult, they were known as the people of the way, and they were persecuted often. They were quite a scapegoat. The Jewish people were persecuted somewhat, but they held a lot of positions of power and in the Roman Empire, and because of that, even though they were not regarded as fully Roman citizens, they were also regarded as valuable assets to the empire. Christians were not. So we have Peter, and I want to remind us a little bit about Peter because this is relevant working our way into what he's about to talk about as he closes out his book. So let's start in the book of Luke, with chapter 22, verses 54 to 62, and I'm going to read that. Peter, we all know, is one of the apostles. He's been traveling with Jesus, and he comes to this place and this time. Jesus has been arrested. The man of miracles, the man who called Peter, the man who had him cast his nets over the side of the boat and hauled in all the fish, the man who went up on the mountaintop and he saw him glorified. He heard from the Holy Spirit. He heard from the Father. Saw him walking with Moses and Elijah. All those things that had happened, and now he finds himself with Jesus arrested, and he doesn't know what to do. And it's going further and further out of control for him. And maybe the things that he had expected weren't quite happening the way he had hoped that they would. But remember this passage. I want to read this because I want to read this in relation to where we're going to wind up. But this is starting at verse 54 in Luke 22. Having arrested him, they led him away and brought him to the house of the high priest. But Peter was following at a distance. After they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter was sitting among them. And a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the firelight, and looked intently at him and said, "This man was with him too." But he denied it, said, "Woman, I do not know him." A little later, another saw him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." After about an hour had passed, another man began to insist, saying, "Certainly this man was also with him, for he is a Galilean also." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you're talking about." Immediately while he was speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had told him, before a rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. Cannot imagine, first of all, the suffering of Jesus to get to this point. And when we look at the suffering of Jesus, we have to look beyond the physical pain that he was going through as he was being beaten, and they were going to hang him on a cross. Remember too that he is here to rescue us, to save us, and he's seeing all these people oppose him, and all these people who say terrible things against his Father, against him, against the creation, against the truth, following after a lie, and how discouraging that would be. How discouraged we get when we see people accuse us falsely or follow after lies, and we try to convince them otherwise and convince them of the truth, and they will not listen. They will not hear. And emotion carries them away, and it wells up within them, and they're no longer capable of thinking because they don't know the facts and they don't know the truth. And Jesus himself is the truth. Peter knew the truth. He knew who Jesus was. He said he was Messiah. And yet when this place came, he denied him 3 times. And Jesus looked at him knowing what had happened. Now, how did Jesus look at him? I, of my mind, am certain that it was not in a look of accusation. I think it was more a look of acknowledgement. It was more of a look of, Peter, you need to see yourself as who you are so you can truly see who I am. And at that point, I think Peter really looked in at himself, and he saw how low he was and how low he could go. And this happened, and he denied Jesus. So after that, Jesus, we know the story further. He was raised from the dead, and we hear more about that. And we'll go to the book of John, the very end of the book of John. Let me turn there. Sorry, I had this bookmarked and I've lost my bookmark. I'm not going to edit this out because I want to talk to you about this. But instead of finishing with an accusation, Jesus restores Peter, and restores him in a powerful way. And as he restores him, I think we need to see this and view this also as where we are in all this, because of what's about to come. So Jesus has reappeared. He has seen the apostles twice already. This is the 3rd time. They're at the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus has just called them in and cooked breakfast for them. And they've had a meal of fish. And so Jesus said, come and have breakfast. This is in the book of John, chapter 21. I'm starting at verse 12. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples ventured to question him, who are you? Knowing that it was the Lord. And Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and the fish likewise. Now this is the 3rd time that Jesus was manifested to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend my lambs. He said to him a 2nd time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said to him, shepherd my sheep. He said to him a 3rd time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he had said to him the 3rd time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, tend my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you that when you were younger, you used to gird yourself and walk wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will gird you and will bring you where you do not wish to go. And he said this, signifying by what kind of death Peter would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, follow me. So here's the man. All the things that have ever been said about Peter, rash and impetuous and all that, but really this deeply broken man who was restored by Jesus. And restored, not just brought back, but restored as his disciple and his follower. and he was calling him to tend his sheep, to be an apostle and to be an elder before the leadership of the Lord. That's Peter. And that's where we're going to start. So turning to 1 Peter chapter 5. Peter begins, therefore. Now, when you hear therefore, that means something happened before that. And he's tying that together in the message. There's two therefores in this final chapter of the book. This therefore is referring back to the suffering of Jesus and the suffering of Jesus' people. That is going to come. It's going to happen. And the final verse of chapter 4 is, therefore also those who suffer according to the will of God shall entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. Therefore, I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ and a partaker of the glory to be revealed, shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness. Nor yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be an examples to the flock. That's the first 3 verses of this. Let's go back and look at that a little bit. So, he's exhorting the elders. Now, who are the elders? Elders are people who are given leadership by the Lord over someone else. Now, we in our church, we have a board of elders. We have to be careful because sometimes we will look at a board of elders and elders of the church and we'll think, oh, we elected those people or we ratified those people. And so therefore we had a hand in them becoming elders. When the reality is, as an elder, that those people are being given oversight and leadership over us. Now, I served on the board of elders. I did that for 6 years, and I'm not on that board anymore. And I can talk a little bit about how that operates there. It's not, being an elder is not so much in our church. It's not so much being in charge, but it's more about being a helper and a servant to the rest of the congregation. Elders are there to assist and to aid and to serve and to live by example. And he talks about this. He exhorts the elders among them. He says Peter calls himself a fellow elder. So he identifies himself as an elder himself to the church at the time. And then he kind of adds a little bit of qualifications to that. As your fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ. Now, we just got done talking about that in chapter 4 and how Jesus had suffered. And a partaker of the glory that is to be revealed. So, he walked the earth, he was a witness to the sufferings of Christ, and he knows that the promise of the glory to be revealed is laying ahead. And that's his role in the church. We need to be the same way. Now, I'm speaking to Love in Action. There is one elder in our class. I think there might be more than one. There's more than one. There's 2 or 3. But an elder being defined as someone who's been given some people in the faith to lead qualifies all of you as elders to some degree. Every person hearing my voice on this recording, on this lesson, you are an elder in someone else's life as a Christian, unless you are a brand new Christian. And there are brand new Christians that will hear this. But if you're not a brand new Christian and you've been a Christian for some time, you are an elder to somebody else. You serve as an example. You serve as someone who is there to help that person or those people navigate this difficult place, this world that tries to take us from the kingdom of heaven and take our eyes off the Lord and put our eyes on the things of the world and of the earth. The unimportant things, the things that get in the way. And as elders, not only do we need to prod them that way. And it's not good enough to say, I'll pray for you. It's not good enough to say that I will tell you what to do. But as an elder, you need to live it, because that's really how someone is able to see how to navigate. It says that in verse 2. Shepherd the flock among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness. The eagerness is a great word, because it's not just eagerness, it's great enthusiasm. And that doesn't mean be excited and all that, but when I go about a task enthusiastically, that means that I'm going to go ahead and do the background work on it. I'm going to find out what I need to do. I'm going to do the research on it. I'm going to dig in and get involved. And being an elder means that I have to pour myself into that role. The other important thing to note is, as an elder, this is not something that you sign up for. This is not something you earn. This is something that is assigned to you, assigned to me by the Lord. And so therefore, even though we can force people to take leadership positions, there are ways to do that. You can, and let's look at the role of a pastor. I can hire a pastor, and then I can give him a list of duties to do. And then if he isn't doing those duties, then I can force him by threatening to fire him or her. Okay, now I'm starting to get them to do things by compulsion. And that's different than what's being talked about here. It's voluntarily, and it's not for gain. And I'm talking about us right now, because we do need to pay the people that are giving up their ability to earn a livelihood to serve on our behalf. But I'm talking about the rest of us who are also called to be elders. And I personally don't know of anybody who's doing that personally in my life, and you hear stories about other people, and let's just not worry about those people, okay? But it's not for gain. But it's also not for power, and it's not for power position. It's not something to use a word, to lord over people and to say, hey, look at me, and look at how important I am, and look at how you should be following me. Not only does the elder not do it, lead because they're compelled to lead, but they also don't compel their followers to follow. Because in the end, an elder is not the person that we're following. Jesus is the person that we're discipled to, and he's the one we're following. So at verse 4, after we're in an example to flock, and when the shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. So even though you're not working toward a reward, if you're faithful, there is a reward to come anyway. How do I separate those things? Well, the reward's not the motivation, but it's going to come anyway, because God is one who rewards those who seek him and seek him diligently. So Peter talks to us, and remember, look at this in relationship to how Peter denied the Lord 3 times, and then he was restored, and yet he was this great elder over elders. The same thing goes for you too. As you are being put in a position, I'm not even going to tell you called, because sometimes we don't feel we're called, and it's not a feeling thing, but if you find yourself people looking to you and looking to you to lead them, well, you're an elder. And the Lord has placed you in that position so that you can be an example to those people, to help them navigate whatever's going on. And you've been qualified through the things that have happened to you in your life. Chapter 4, you've been qualified by some of the sufferings you've gone through. Some of the tragedies or the difficulties that you've experienced, you can go places that other people can't. You can relate to people, and people can relate to you. That's even more important, because they can see how you have handled the great difficulties that have come into your life. And then they can see that it's not that you're such a stoic and strong and individual, but how the Lord has carried you through. That's what they're to see, and that's how they need to see that. But, just like last time I talked about I get to tell people what to do, telling those wives how to act around their husbands. I get to tell you younger men how to act too here. So Peter talks to the younger. He says in verse 5, you younger, Likewise, be subject to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, for God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Chilling words if pride gets into us, because who is God opposed to? He's opposed to the proud. What was the great sin that came into the Garden of Eden? Well, it was pride. Pride in that Adam and Eve desired to know the difference between good and evil, and more importantly, decided to be able to determine the difference between things that are good and things that are evil. Not right and wrong, but good and evil. And that's where the Garden of Eden led us all astray. And we are experiencing that in a world all the time. Amazingly today, we're experiencing in the United States really a lot more. Part of it is because the social restraints that were artificially placed on people have been lifted, whether it be by social pressure or by some customs and those things. Well, all that's being torn down right now. And as that gets torn down, people are deciding for themselves what is good and evil. We talked about it. I mean, it was talked about when I was in school, back I went to grade school in the 60s and high school in the 70s, and college then, that the relative morality that had come into the teaching in the universities and in the high schools. Relative in that I get to determine my truth. And you'll hear that said a lot. Well, that's your truth. This is my truth. Now there's truth. And we need to follow after that. But the only people that can truly know truth are Christians. So I cannot expect the non-Christian world to know what is true and what is not, because they're out there deciding on their own, because they're still operating under the Garden of Eden original sin. Whereas you and I have been set free from that. And so we are free to know the truth, and the truth makes us free, and the truth is Jesus Christ. Now, they may deny him, they may not want to hear us talk about him, but that doesn't change truth. Truth remains, and truth is truth. So he says, be subject to your elders, and all of you, and he doesn't stop there, he just continues the sentence, and all of you clothe yourselves in humility. The word clothe yourself is really an interesting word, because it speaks of a garment that at the time was used. There was a couple of them that were used, but essentially it was tied in the back with a knot, and it was either a covering for your arms, and it was used for protection of your arms. So think of someone wearing a tunic, and they needed to protect their arms for whatever was cold or whatever was going on. So they would clothe themselves with this garment. And they would put these sleeves on, and they would tie it around the back of their neck, and that's one of the words that's being talked about. The other way that this word is used to talk about the apron put on by a slave to do service. Similar to what Jesus put on when he wrapped a towel around himself when he did foot washing for the disciples. And Peter is calling us back to that. He is reminding us that we are to serve with humility, regardless of position. So even though he talks to the young men and says, young, and did he call them young men? I think he did. Yeah, you younger men, be subject to your elders. But he's not just talking about age, he's talking about people new to the faith. He's also saying to those who are not new to the faith, be humble, know your place, know who you are. You are followers of Jesus Christ. You are not Jesus Christ. Don't ever take his place. Instead, point to him all the time. God is opposed to the proud. I do not want to be opposed to God. Therefore, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time. When I hear that, and we sing songs about that, humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. There's a lot there. But that takes me back in particular to Psalm 91. Because this section kind of refers to that. In humbling myself, and he will lift me up. casting all my care on him, all my anxiety on him, because he cares for me. Be of sober mind, be on the alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. Sitting under the mighty hand in verse 6. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. So, when he talks about the mighty hand of God, he's not talking about a hand that is there to strike and discipline. Don't think of that in those terms. Because the mighty hand of God is not, it's a protective hand, it's a covering hand, it's a warding off hand, it's a shadowing hand. And to see how that plays out, let's look at Psalm 91, and I'll read some of that, just because this is a great psalm, and I love this psalm. So he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God, in whom will I trust? For it is he who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from the deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions, and as under his wings you may seek refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and a bulwark. You will not be afraid of the terror by night, or of the arrow that flies by day, of the pestilence that stalks in darkness, or of the destruction that lays waste at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. You will only look on with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked. For you have made the Lord my refuge, even the Most High your dwelling place. No evil will befall you, nor will any plague come near your tent. That's humbling yourself under the mighty hand of God, because he is the one that's fighting this spiritual battle on our behalf. He is the one that stands for us. He is the one that shields us from the attacks. He just asks us to stand firm. So casting our anxiety on him, because he cares for you. It's kind of a trust issue. Do you trust God? Doesn't mean you're not going to go through hard times. That's not what trust is about. Trust is about seeing it all the way through to the other side. Trust is about he is going to be with you all the way. Be of a sober spirit, be on the alert. Now, sober doesn't mean non-drinking. That's not what that means. Sober means to be deliberate, to be circumvent, to consider your surroundings, to pay attention to what's going on. To the degree that, let's go back to Mark, in the book of Mark chapter 13. Jesus has just talked about the fig tree. Well, here we go. Let's read this. This is verse 28 to 37 in the book of Mark. So he says, now learn from the parable of the fig tree. When its branch had already become tender and put forth its leaves, you know that summer is near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that he is near, right at the door. These things he's talking about are calamities and difficulties and bad things. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Take heed, keep on the alert, for you do not know when the appointed time will come. It's like a man who's away on a journey, who upon leaving his house and putting his slaves in charge, assigning to each one his task, also commanded the doorkeeper to stay on the alert. Therefore be on the alert, for you do not know when the master of the house is coming, whether in the evening, at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning. In case he should come suddenly and find you asleep, what I say to you all, be on the alert. So it's a reference back to that, but it's even a little more of a reference. Let's go back a little more into Peter's difficulty that he was going through as he walked with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. What did he do when Jesus asked him to come and pray with him? He fell asleep. He lost watch. And I can see the heart of Peter as he's saying, I will not let that happen again. And I want to encourage you to not let what happened to me happen to you. He's been through that hard place of knowing that he didn't stay the watch with the Lord. And I'm not saying we would. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying he walked that path. And that's a hard path. And it's a hard place of disappointment. He had a rough time that night. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion seeking someone to devour. I've never been around a roaring lion. Seen him on TV, seen him in the zoo. I mean, a roaring lion at the zoo, sorry. He's still behind cages and all that stuff. It's loud and it's you can kind of sense the power. But in reading about how lions are in Africa, when a lion roars close, part of the reason for the lion's roar is to paralyze and strike fear. And to cause, as the fear happens, for the one who's being stalked to freeze and to stop acting and to just stand there and let the lion come. And he's saying, you know, the devil's going around doing that, and he's looking for someone to devour. How do you handle that? So in verse 9 he says, but resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. The enemy is roaring. He's roaring all around us. And we need to stand firm in the faith and encourage each other to stand firm in the faith and be of help to each other and not let the roaring lion get the better of us. So one more thing about roaring lions. Just remember that Peter says that your enemy, Satan, wanders around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. The true Lion of Judah is our King, and he is the one that will see us through. So cast all your fears on him. Be sober and be diligent. Pay attention. Pay attention more so to know where the truth lies and to avoid the deceptions, even the subtle deceptions that come from this world, because there are many. And I'm not going to get into the list, but I think in a future lesson I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the philosophies that are out there politically that are using subtlety and are using pressure. They're using roaring to get you off and away from the Lord. Because sometimes we look to earthly solutions because we want to stop the noise. We want to stop the pressure. We want to stop whatever it is that's going on that we don't like. And we have to be careful and we have to be cautious. Don't get caught up in what's going on. Do not get caught up. I've given this example to a few people, and I'm gonna give it to you here. Here's a little something for you to look at. If you're upset about statues being torn down, I will remind you of the fourth commandment and leave it at that. If you don't know the fourth commandment, I'll let you look it up, because I want you to go and look and see and think about how all that applies. We need to be careful to what we revere, is what I'm saying. So resist him, and he will flee from you. Stand firm. Because there are sufferings going on throughout the world by our brethren today, every day. After you have suffered for a little while, he didn't say you're not going to suffer. He didn't say there weren't going to be problems. He didn't say there weren't going to be difficulties. He said after you have suffered for a little while, however long that little while may be. And for some people it's longer than others. The God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. Does that take you back to he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it? He will. And he will do all those things because he is our loving, gracious Heavenly Father. And his Son has come and still sits on the throne today as our King. To him be dominion forever and ever. Amen. And that's how Peter takes us towards the end of this letter. There's a little more to go, and we'll get to that in a minute here. But he's saying it's going to happen. He talked about suffering. He talked about difficulties. He talked about being faithful and true. And Peter comes to us from a place of experience. He's done those things. He's on the other side. And yet he is still able, with confidence and with strength and with faith and perseverance, to present the pure, unfiltered truth of the gospel and the word to us. Even though he had failed, even though he had suffered, he had gone through all those things, he had watched Jesus go through all he had went through, Peter still presents that to us. So he finishes his epistle, his letter, with these words: "Through Silvanus, our faithful brother, for I so regard him, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it." Just a quick word on Silvanus. Part of why this letter had a minor amount of controversy was because it was so well written. They said it was written far too well for an uneducated fisherman to be able to have written it. Well, aside from the fact that the Lord gives grace to whoever he gives to, and they're able to do things extraordinarily above their own ability, it's believed that Silvanus was, his name is a Greek name, that he was an accomplished scribe, that he would be able to write very carefully, very eloquently, and quite likely, because he says through Silvanus, this letter was dictated by Peter to Silvanus. So Peter would say the words, and then Silvanus would go ahead and write them out in the language that he would use, almost like an interpretation of some sort. Didn't change the meaning of the words, but he did change them to the words that he would use to express the meaning of what Peter was saying. So he's written you briefly, exhorting you and testifying that this is the true grace of God. So the purpose of this letter is to exhort us, to build us up, to give us confidence, to give us hope, to help build our faith. "She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark." A couple more references. Babylon was often, at that time, the reference to Rome. Babylon was also the pagan kingdom that had conquered Israel earlier. But if you look at, in particular, Babylon the Great from the book of Revelation, the Revelations to John, Babylon is also seen as that world kingdom, that large, encompassing kingdom that is the leader of the carnal world at that time. So she who is in Babylon, talking about the church in Rome essentially, chosen together with you, part of us, chosen together, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark, who is believed to be John Mark, who's also believed to be the author of the Gospel of Mark. Greet one another with a kiss of love, and peace be to you all who are in Christ. The kiss of love was considered to be the end of the service, the end of the meal, the end of the communion. You gave the blessing, and then the kiss of love. The kiss is not necessarily with the lips, it's a hug, it's a greeting, it's a coming together. And that's the kiss of love. Peace be to you, all who are in Christ. And so ends 1 Peter. I hope that you go back and reread it again. I hope you have the opportunity to do that. We covered a lot of ground. In particular today, Peter's reminding us, just as a bit of quick review here, to know our place. And what is our place? What does humility mean? Humility means knowing our place and then acting true to that place that we know we're supposed to be. The truth of who we are. The truth that I am not God, so I should never assume the role of God. And the role of God is the one who determines good from evil, among other things. He's also the creator, he's also all those other things. But we should not usurp the position of God in our lives or in the world. And we need to understand that. Nor should we condemn other people. We are not in the condemning business. That's not who we are. That's not our role. We are to humble ourselves before the Lord. We are to take that place we're supposed to be. Now let me flip that around a little bit. part of humility is acting true to what you're called to be. If you're called to lead at times, you have to step aside from that lower position and take the other position, the position of leadership, whether it be for a season or longer, and to act in that position during that time. That's also humility. Now, you don't hold it over people, you don't lord it over people, you're still doing that. It's parenting is that way. We are in the positions as parents to raise our children up. We're not there to dominate them. We're not there to make them suffer. That's just an example. As employers, if you're an employer of people, you're in a position, and you're in a position of leadership. And as much as we want to believe that we earned all these things, that's another discussion. But in the end, Christian, you are in the position you're in because the Lord has placed you there. So be humble and be true to the position that you find yourself in. And that's what Peter's talking about here. But ultimately, we're still followers of Jesus Christ, and never lose sight of that. And hold firm to that. And don't allow yourself to get pulled off. And don't let the world pull you off of that. So that's the message of 1 Peter. We have an enemy. He's active. He's trying to destroy us. He has his people. His people are active. They're trying to destroy us, either by tripping us up or convincing us to destroy ourselves. That's part of that discussion I want to have with you about some of the techniques that are being used in the world today. Some really interesting things that we'll have for that. So don't get caught up in that. That's the tool of the enemy. And the enemy has no love for you, and the enemy does not want to see you succeed in any way as a Christian. Nor does he want the Lord lifted up, nor is he known. Thank you. May God bless you and grant you peace as you go forward in this week, and look forward to starting our next part of our study. Like I said, I may go, there's a couple ways I'm going to go. I'm still going to work that through in the next couple of days, and I may take a short break before we start 2 Peter up, but I don't want to get too far away from Peter as we go forward. So God bless you, and thank you for joining me this morning, all of us together. And I hope to see you at the service. You're seeing this on Sunday morning this morning. If you missed it, you can see it online. But looking forward to that day when we can all get back together again. God bless.